2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around 2 o'clock tonight. First, glad right on. Join me high. We'll have some fun when the clock strikes one. We're gonna rock around 2 o'clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock. Till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Why do bad things okay? And lovers know when to break the day. Why do they fall in love?
We're gonna miss mom. So late and long. Gonna miss mom. So late and long.
It's a story of dreams, a story of aspirations, the story of poor boys with guitars. Poor boys like Elvis, like Little Richard, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens. These boys from the ghetto, from the farm, from the barrio, only had their music. All those pioneers of the 50s took their music and transcended their lives and achieved a status that created a new art form for us.
I wasn't even in my teens when suddenly this rumbling, threatening sound came blaring out of radios, and it was like, hey, somebody out there is talking to me, and it is not Doris Day.
You're talking about things changing in Houston, things changing in Oklahoma City, things changing in Shreveport, Louisiana, and everywhere in between. They changed. They changed.
If I'm guilty of anything, I'm guilty of being present at the birth of rock and roll. A music which is the honest, spontaneous expression of today's youth.
We were pioneers and all, but we were also caught up in it. It was brand new for us, just like it was everybody else, and really exciting. It was the only music we wanted to make back then and even now, you know.
It was the birth of rock and roll. It was very young, it was very optimistic, very hopeful.
When I was young, like a lot of other people, you know, that rock was something new, it was something vibrant, explosive, full of life, and of course it affects you in your teenage years.
This man is really responsible for many trends starting in the 50s. I think you, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, possibly Elvis.
Well, the people that, no, not possibly Elvis.
Every musician today has been influenced by Jerry Lee. You know, the world's music from that area, Carl Perkins, Elvis Presley.
God is not annoyed at Elvis or the Beatles or anybody else. He's definitely a fan of rock and roll. And if there's a God in the sense that most people think of him as the boss man, he definitely invented this stuff as a hobby and sent a couple of people down, Elvis, etc., as a present.
Rock and roll really got going about 2 years after Playboy. They were the phenomenons in the 1950s that really planted the seeds of the social changes that took place in the 60s.
It just all depends, on how you look at it. I guess if you want to think it's nasty or sexy, you could, but to me it's just,
the two things are not necessarily the same.
Yeah, well, it's just so limber and loose. It's really marvelous.
It's the damnedest story in this world, what took place in the formulation of the psyche of people for this to happen.
Everybody repeat after me. Hail, hail, rock and roll!
Blackboard Jungle came out in 1955, and it sort of galvanized this country.
Blackboard Jungle was a gritty drama about life in an urban high school. but it wasn't the story that ignited an untamed passion in its young audience.
What really supercharged the film was it starts off, the very first thing you hear,
2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock.
and suddenly here's blasting through these speakers, these big theater speakers, which were much louder than what was coming through jukeboxes or your record player at home, and blasting this new music, heralding something brand new.
The first use of rock and roll in film was this movie Blackboard Jungle. That movie actually caused riots in Europe. It was such a driven sound. The good news was that basically it brought rock and roll around the world instantly.
Blackboard Jungle at the time was a rather shocking film, and of course it was the instigating factor for rock and roll with Bill Haley with Rock Around the Clock. Of course, I had been listening to the black stations for years and adored rock and roll. I just thought it was fabulous stuff. Blackboard Jungle did have quite an influence on our country as far as shaking people up quite a bit in many ways.
Bill Haley's song Rock Around the Clock was featured prominently in the film, helping to ignite a movement and propelling Haley into rock history.
It was recorded in April of 1954. It became a small hit and then fell off the charts. And then, fortunately, Richard Brooks, who wrote the screenplay and directed Blackboard Jungle, heard the song, liked it, and put it in Blackboard Jungle. So when the film was released in 1955, Decca reissued Rock Around the Clock, and by July 2nd, it was the #1 song in the country. Pretty much the entire country knew that some kind of new music had arrived, and the term rock and roll had already been affixed to it.
Bill Haley may have pushed rock and roll into the public limelight in 1955, but it had evolved from a variety of influences and creative minds.
Rock and roll is a river of music, which has absorbed many streams. Rhythm and blues, jazz, ragtime, cowboy songs, country songs, folk songs, all have contributed greatly to the big beat.
Big Joe Williams was throwing rock riffs into his pioneering blues sound as early as 1935, when he wrote and recorded the earliest known version of Baby Please Don't Go.
Baby, please don't.
The song has been remade throughout the years by many rock artists, surviving virtually unchanged from the Mississippi Delta.
Caledonia! What make your big head so hard? Mouth!
Louis Jordan was rocking with his own brand of big beat jazz in the 1940s, scoring an astonishing 57 R&B chart hits. In doing so, he drew up an easily followed blueprint for the progression of rock and roll.
There's a lot made out of the fact that rock and roll came out of rhythm and blues. Certainly, rhythm and blues affected it, and Bill Haley and his Comets, in some ways, were really sort of like a white version of Louis Jordan and his Timpani 5. In fact, they had the same producer, and Bill Haley and his Comets replaced Louis Jordan at Decca.
In January of 1950, radio announcer and engineer Sam Phillips opened the Memphis recording studio, later to become the infamous Sun Records. Phillips had been exposed to blues, spirituals, and country music while growing up in Alabama during the Great Depression.
Keep in mind, for 3 years before Elvis ever came in the studio, I was recording. I didn't want to start a record label, didn't have the money. I wanted to go ahead and help to create the talent if I was good enough to do it, and I thought maybe I might be. I understood it, felt it, and wanted to do it. And so I formed Sun Records.
There was no other studio in Memphis when Phillips opened for business. This ensured that much of the region's talent would be eager to try things out for him, and he began recording demo records for aspiring musicians, both country and blues.
There were all these guys around. He has all the blues guys coming up from Mississippi. And Memphis itself was a big river town. It was a place where it was like a center of the cotton industry in that part of the country. He just happened to be there. He had a studio, and he had all these people there who, up until then, really didn't have a chance to record. So he just happened to be, I think, there at the right place at the right time.
On On March 5, 1951, a DJ from Mississippi drove to Memphis with his band in tow. Ike Turner and his cousin Jackie Brenston had worked up a rollicking number called Rocket 88, and they decided to lay it down at Sun Studios. But during the drive, the guitar amp fell from the top of the car.
Ike Turner's guitarist, Willie Keysard, had accidentally broken the speaker on his amp on the way to the Sun studio. And so I guess it's the first record with a fuzz tone guitar. And it's got a beat, it's got the piano, it's got all the elements of rock and roll.
Rocket 88's first rock and roll record ever cut is what the historians are saying. But it was something that I had to be doing it because I believed so much in it and proved my butt from the time I was a child and hearing black people and hearing highly inspired white and black singing in churches in the South.
The Treniers helped link swing music to rock and roll with their brand of hot jump blues in the late 40s and early 50s. The group anticipated some crucial elements of rock and roll with their solid thumping beats, squealing saxophone solos, and song titles like Rocking on Sunday Night and Rockin' Is Our Business. One summer in the early 1950s, the leader of a little-known country and western swing band caught the Treniers act at a nightclub in Wildwood, New Jersey. Excited by their raucous stage show, the young musician decided to take his country music career in a new direction.
Bill Haley himself admitted that a lot of what he picked up was from the Treniers.
Haley kept exploring this exciting new sound, and soon Bill Haley and his renamed group, the Comets, would change the world.
Bill Haley was a strange phenomenon. Basically, Bill was a disc jockey in Pennsylvania, and he originally started with a country group. It was Bill Haley and the Saddlemen, and then when he saw rock and roll, took the Saddlemen and made him into the Comets, and actually had, even though it wasn't the first rock record, it was one of the biggest, which was Rock Around the Clock.
The first major rock and roll record impressed me was Rock Around the Clock, Bill Haley and the Comets. And of course, when that came to Britain, it caused riots in the cinemas that people were picking the seats up and throwing them and dancing in the aisles.
We got our legs moving. Bill Haley got our legs moving, even before Elvis, right?
Well, we quite often have people come to meet us like that, but I think this was the most enthusiastic reception I've ever seen.
Bill Haley had the advantage of being the first superstar of rock that really was out there all the time. I mean, he had a string of hits, and also he toured nonstop, and he was actually the first American rock and roller that toured Europe. He was the ambassador for rock around the world.
By the time they got to Berlin, which at that time was not a divided city, it was within Eastern Germany. That was before the wall. So all these teenagers came from West Berlin and East Berlin to the big sports palace, and apparently this riot broke out. The Comets had to flee the stage. The kids ran up on the stage, trashed everything.
Finally back home, after rocking and rolling their way through a somewhat startled Europe, the violent, frenetic masters of dissonance, Bill Haley and his Comets. I can see things need a good shaking up around here.
The term rock and roll goes back to the early part of the 20th century at least. And there was a record that came out, a blues record by Trixie Smith came out in 1923 called My Man Rocks Me with One Steady Roll. It's interesting to note that a white remake of that record in 1925 by Harold Ortley and his Ohio Collegians changed one word to turn rock and roll from sex into dancing. It was changed from a horizontal to a vertical in a way. It was grinding on the dance floor. But the term really came back full blast in rhythm and blues about 1948, and so that's what Alan Freed really seized on.
And here it is, Alan Freed's Rock and Roll Party. And here he is in person, Alan Freed.
Hello, everybody. How y'all? Welcome to our Rock and Roll Jubilee of Stars. And here we go to rockin'.
Rock and roll popped up because Alan Freed came up with the phrase rock and roll.
He was the first one to popularize the term, and he actually, while he was in Cleveland as a disc jockey, put on the first ever rock and roll show.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, this is the man who made rock and roll music the tremendous success it is today.
And then he became so popular in Cleveland, they moved him to WINS in New York. Then he went crazy. He was great.
Rock and roll was rhythm and blues, and Alan Freed changed the name of rhythm and blues to rock and roll. Everybody listen here. Mr. Rock and Roll is here.
The kind of music that I grew up listening to, because, you know, I was a child of the 50s, really, was Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, basically all the American rock stars. And through listening to that music and through my interest in playing the guitar, I kind of discovered that music was really American rhythm and blues music.
The Negro has had a major influence on the total culture of America, which, of course, as I say, in American music is the greatest influence on the world.
Early rock and roll was still taken off of really rhythm and blues. Alan Freed and those guys went through quite a thing with people wanting to ban rock and roll and calling the devil's music and that kind of a thing, you know.
Alan Freed was revered for making rhythm and blues music accessible to a large white audience. And it wasn't long before radio stations across the country followed suit.
This Alan Freed character, as far as I can see, he's the proverbial Pied Piper who's just sort of cashing in on a few illicit adolescent emotions.
The best thing I think about Alan Freed is the fact that he never played the cover versions of records. He would stick to the original black versions. So he would play Shaboom by the Corrs and not by the Crew Cuts, or Little Darlin' by the Gladiolas and not by the Diamonds. And so I thought he was like amazing to be that powerful and to stick to the real music.
One reason why Alan Freed has remained popular, he was sort of the patron saint of rock and roll, was that he stayed true to the black roots of those early records, just at a time when cover versions were taking over the market. The funny thing, by 1954 and 55, you could look at the top 10 and probably about 5, 6, 7 of the records were white remakes of rhythm and blues songs.
And now, here's one of your favorite vocal groups, the Moonglows.
The Moonglows were among the most important rhythm and blues acts of the 1950s, despite the fact that they only had a handful of hits during a history that lasted just 6 years. Their first break came in 1952 when Alan Freed noticed their act in Cleveland.
Harry Fuqua is one of the founders of rhythm and blues, because he had a group called the Moonglows, and as a kid growing up I had all their records, and Harvey's records were such that his group was like in the neighborhood. When you had your group, and you were learning the Moonglows records, everybody learned the background before they learned the lead, because they always had these little intricate backgrounds that they were doing, you know, all that, you know.
The Moonglows, I think, even though they didn't have that many hits, they sort of became a kind of a standard for the black groups about that time because they were smooth. They had that real smooth sound.
I give it over and over again.
Eventually, Freed moved the group to the preeminent blues label of the 1950s and 60s, Chess Records. Their first session was one of the most productive in the history of the label, yielding 13 songs, including one of the biggest hits in Chess Records history, Sincerely. The single rode the R&B listings for 20 weeks and sold over 250,000 records. The Moonglows became one of the earliest R&B groups to see an original song picked up by a pop act when the white vocal trio the McGuire Sisters covered Sincerely and got a #1 hit, selling 4 times as many records as the Moonglows version.
The people that really controlled the airwaves were sort of terrified of the black threat. It was too independent. There were a lot of small labels that were putting out these black records, and so the major labels would usually try and steal the hits. So like Sincerely by the Moonglows, it would be covered by McGuire Sisters. Pat Boone built his entire career on covering black records just when they started to hit.
You've got to transpose yourself back to the 50s now and the racial situation and what people felt about black music is, okay, if it's good, it ought to be over here. If it's hillbilly music, okay, that's all right, but it ought to be over here. If it's pop music, it ought to be here, and if it's symphonic music, it ought to be way up here, you know. Listen, music is music.
This white dude says, this is degrading, this is not for our kids, and we can't have this kind of garbage, this black music on radio and television. This is just corrupting our kids and stuff.
Set up a 20-man committee to do away with this vulgar, animalistic, nigger rock and roll bop.
The Righteous Brothers had a lot of trouble getting our music played. The early stuff, they said it was too rock and roll, too hard rock and roll. What they were really saying, it sounds black and we can't play it.
Rock and roll has got to go, and go it does. That's the best way I know to get rid of it.
We were known as devil music because big bands was okay. But when we started the trio, 4 and 5 quintets and stuff like that, and the big bands went out the window, that was a no-no. This is a different music altogether, and what is it?
The song Shake, Rattle, and Roll was first recorded in 1954 by Big Joe Turner. Bill Haley and the Comets' cover version, released later that year, contained sanitized lyrics and a less bluesy, more pop-sounding arrangement.
I said shake, rattle, and roll.
They knew that a lot of the lyrics in the original Big Joe Turner song would not clear the radio censors, so they took out a few things like Big Joe Turner says, "You wear those dresses, the sun comes shining through. Girl, I can't believe all that mess belongs to you." Well, obviously that had to be cleaned up. But the one thing that they missed, and this was probably because Bill Haley himself only had one eye. His left eye didn't work, which is why he had that spit curl to take people's attention away from that eye that was kind of like off this way. There's that great line.
I like a one-eyed cat peeping in a seafood store.
That's obviously a sexual reference, but they left that one in. Either they didn't know what the heck it was, or they figured, well, he's a one-eyed cat.
The obscenity and vulgarity of the rock and roll music is obviously a means by which the white man, his children, can be driven to the level with a nigger. It is obviously nigger music.
What we know is that even though it's fairly well established and acknowledged that black musicians and performers are the major architects of the beginning of rock and roll and have been the heavy contributors to its form and shape.
Before the mid-1950s, radio stations catered largely to segregated audiences, and a handful of rhythm and blues stations across the country were popular among African Americans. Tired of the crooners from their parents' generation, white teenagers began to listen to rhythm and blues stations, seeking music that they could call their own.
Usually the question that people ask me is, what killed the hit parade? And it was rock and roll. Rock and roll came in, and you know, what could you do with "Do It To Me Baby All Night Long," and that same lyric is repeated endlessly. What can you do with that? My kids, they grew up with that, and it's their form of expression.
No, Mom, I want a guitar because I want to play like Chuck Berry. I want to play like Bo Diddley or Cat Play Piano. I want to play like Fats Domino. And the parents couldn't understand this. Where are you getting this from? Why do you want to play this kind of music?
And there was a disconnect, I think, between the World War II generation and their kids. And so when these kids, first of all, started listening to rhythm and blues, which really started rising up about 53 to 54, that's when the concern for what the kids were listening to really became very palpable in this country.
Bo Diddley was one of the great innovators. He took the standard shave and a haircut 2 bits rhythm and put it to almost every one of his records. But I mean, he was incredible because he was an incredible dancer, and his guitars were amazing. A lot of the guitars he built by hand, and they were all weird-shaped guitars, stuff like we had never seen before.
I am self-taught. I don't sound like anybody. Everybody tries to do what they think I'm doing. When I got to be about 16 years old, I wanted to try to play some blues, and it didn't work. So I just started beating and banged up on Bo Diddley. I never liked to copy people. I was very lucky that I came up with something that stood alone.
In 1955, rock and roll exploded. Just weeks after Haley's Rock Around the Clock became the first rock song to hit #1 on the charts, Chuck Berry's single Maybelline was hot on its heels. Berry is regarded today as one of the elder statesmen of rock and roll.
Chuck Berry was, at that time, what we call rhythm and blues. He took the rhythm pattern, and instead of like Jimmy Reed, da 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 da, he souped it up and put syncopation in it. Dun 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 dun, and that's called syncopation, which became rhythm.
The hits came fast for Berry. Every one of them would become a classic of the genre. Songs like Roll Over Beethoven, Rock and Roll Music, Memphis, Tennessee, and Johnny B. Good brought Berry from picking the blues for $15 a night in St. Louis to international stardom at the dawn of rock and roll.
It started back in 1954 when I was touring the country, and I stopped here in Chicago and I heard Muddy Waters playing, and I sat and listened to him, and I asked him, how do you get into records? He said, well, go over and see Lynn Chess and see if you can arrange something with him. And I did this the following morning. And Leonard Chess told me to, well, let me hear some of your material. And on this tape, I had Maybelline, Wee Wee Hours. These two he chose off the tape and told me to bring the band back. I did this, and we recorded on professional material. And Maybelline, of course, you know the rest after it was put out in 55, May of 55.
The thing that was pure genius about Chuck is that he could write teenage music without it being black or white. What Chuck did single-handedly is the same thing that Motown did later. It was music for teenage America, you know, not for black America, not for white America. So Chuck was one of the few that could really sustain.
Little Richard was another major player in the early growth and popularity of rock and roll. His ecstatic delivery and extraordinary personality were crucial in upping the voltage of R&B into high-powered rock and roll. Heavily influenced by the gospel music he was exposed to while growing up in Georgia, Little Richard began recording his unique style of music in the early 1950s. In 1955, Richard sent a demo tape to Specialty Records, who were impressed enough to sign him. His first session in New Orleans produced his signature song, Tutti Frutti. And it wasn't long before Richard reeled off a string of classic hits, such as Long Tall Sally, Slippin' and Slidin', The Girl Can't Help It, and Good Golly, Miss Molly.
Good golly, Miss Molly, so at the ball. Golly, Miss Molly, so at the ball.
Little Richard was out of New Orleans, and he basically, as he built himself, he was the king and the queen of rock and roll. He was incredible. I mean, he wrote his own material, was a brilliant pianist, and if not the best showman of rock and roll, one of the best.
How do you get your hair like that, Ed?
Oh, it's a long story, Mike.
No, tell us how you.
Oh, well,
you have
it's
to go
not
to have
done.
it done like
No,
that?
it's me done. I didn't have a chance to get it fixed from doing this television show last night, and I just took the brush and whooped it and hooped it over this way and hooked it out there and did something. I just called it the hoop whoop.
The hoop whoop.
Shut up.
His first #1 hit record wouldn't be released until April 21st, 1956. But starting back in 1954, a truck driver from Memphis, Tennessee, was laying down some groundbreaking tracks at Sun Records.
Elvis came in after hearing some of the things that I had produced for a number of years on black people. He finally got up the courage to come in and tell Marion Kaiska, who worked for me, and say that he wanted to make a record for his mother, a birthday record. I just saw the guy and I couldn't refuse him, and I thought, hey, yeah, I'll make you a record, Elvis. You got $4?
Born to a poor Mississippi family during the heart of the Depression, Elvis Presley had moved to Memphis by his teens. Here he absorbed the vibrant melting pot of Southern popular music in the form of blues, country, bluegrass, and gospel.
Presley had something, and we had come up with an approach to music that was so true to a Southern tradition between black blues and white country blues, dating back to the old Jimmy Rogers days.
Phillips teamed Presley with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, and the trio hit upon a version of a blues tune, That's All Right Mama. It became Elvis's first single release.
First time I heard of him was through disc jockey Dewey Phillips in Memphis, because everybody listened to Dewey Phillips. And he got That's All Right Mama and Blue Moon in Kentucky, and he just played them over and over and over and over and over.
The first time I met Elvis, I was completely in total awe, you know, because I thought he was going to be black, because he sounded black. He was sort of an amalgam of country and rock and roll and rhythm and blues and gospel, all that he had grown up with. So when I heard Blue Moon in Kentucky and That's All Right Mama, I thought, well, he's got to be black. And Sam said, no, he's white.
Elvis's 5 Sun singles, That's All Right Mama, Blue Moon of Kentucky, Good Rockin' Tonight, Baby Let's Play House, and Mystery Train immediately sold well in the Memphis area. Presley and his band then hit the road with a controversial stage show featuring Elvis's swiveling hips.
The first time I saw Elvis, he was on the back end of a truck at the Hub Motor Company, I believe it was, parking lot. And there was about 1,500 screaming kids, and mostly girls, hanging around there, and that's when he first had That's All Right Mama out. And about a year later, he came back to the fairgrounds there and sold out the place. And that was a big deal.
One time in an interview, Bill Haley said to me, Red, I think our days are numbered, the Comets. I said, why? He said, there's this good-looking kid down in Memphis they call the Hillbilly Cat. and he's got it all. He can sing, he can play the guitar, but he's a knockout. You know, he's good looking.
Presley was obviously a performer with superstar potential, and before long he was attracting the interest of bigger labels. Being in need of capital to expand his own label, Sam Phillips sold Presley's contract to RCA in late 1955 for $35,000. A bargain when viewed in hindsight, but an astronomical sum at the time.
It wasn't until Colonel Parker took over managing Elvis that Elvis really became a national phenomenon, because Colonel Parker took him off of Sun Records and put him on RCA, gave him incredible TV exposure.
One night, on comes Elvis Presley. I hear from the other room, well, it's 1 for the money, a 2 for the show, a 3 to get ready now, boom, 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 boom. That bass, and I go, what the hell is that? My mother calls out to me, Raymond, you better come in here and take a look at this guy. You like this kind of stuff. I shot into the living room and went, boing. Elvis Presley live on TV. The darkest, meanest, most dangerous white man ever to be on television. Man, it was one of the transcendent moments of my life, altered my destiny. I said, okay, that's what I want. White guys can do rock and roll too.
It was the first time I saw Elvis was on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I thought it was just sensational. I mean, it didn't make any difference if the guitars were out of tune or in tune or anything. Elvis Presley carried the show.
He turned the world around. I mean, he turned music around single-handedly. Elvis came along at a time, he made it okay for white guys to sing black music. He made it all right to wiggle and shake your hips and be sexual and sensual with music, and still be a nice, clean-cut feller. And you know, some way or another, he made that all come together.
The creation of the world's greatest catalyst in music, Elvis Presley.
Everything has happened to me so fast in the last year and a half till I'm all mixed up, you know. I mean, I can't keep up with everything that's happening.
He's a devil with the women, but they all call him a saint. Well, some cats got it, and some cats ain't. And that's Elvis, and he had it.
I had in the can on Carl Perkins a thing called blue suede shoes. I believed in blue suede shoes. I knew that Carl, we had a great record.
In March of 1956, Blue Suede Shoes appeared on Billboard's Hot 100. Elvis Presley's debut RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, also made its appearance on the charts in the same week. But it wasn't long before Blue Suede Shoes was selling over 20,000 copies a day. The single quickly became Sun Records' first million seller. But the label's newcomer, Jerry Lee Lewis, was occupying Sam Phillips' attention. While Phillips loved Perkins' music, he didn't see him as a true contender to Elvis's throne. But with Jerry Lee Lewis, he thought he had a real shot.
Come on over, baby. We got chicken at the bar. Woo, honey. Come on over, baby. Jerry's got the bull by the horn.
Sam Phillips threw every dime of promotional capital he had into Lewis's next single, and the gamble paid off. Whole Lot of Shakin' Going On rocketed to #1 on the country and on the R&B charts.
Most rock stars were guitarists. There were a few pianists like Little Richard and Fats Domino, and the biggest white piano player they made, it was Jerry Lee Lewis and his pumping piano.
Lewis's exploits as a piano-thumping wildman gave him instant legendary status. Few could channel the energy and ego into their music as well as Jerry Lee.
He was the perfect rock and roll guy because he was a wild man. He had that hair, and when you do see him on TV and he's playing on top of the piano and his hair is flying.
Whole Lot of Shakin' Going On was every parent's worst nightmare perfectly realized. A long, blonde-haired Southerner who played the piano and sang with uncontrolled fury. Growing up, his family was dirt poor, but they found enough money to purchase a third-hand piano for their Louisiana country shack. Jerry Lee had to share piano lessons with two of his cousins, Mickey Gilley and Jimmy Lee Swaggart. At an early age, Lewis mixed the boogie-woogie styles he was hearing on the radio with gospel and country to come up with his own style.
Woo, honey. Come on over, baby. Jerry's got the bull by the horn.
bubbling enthusiasm of our teenagers was the inspiration for what is now the most popular style of music in the country, rock and roll.
Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers were centered on the extraordinary talents of their lead singer, 13-year-old Frankie Lyman. In February of 1956, their hit record, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, was released and helped to create the very first African-American teenage pop star. A month later, they were booked by Alan Freed for one of his rock and roll reviews, along with such acts as the Platters and Bill Haley and his Comets. More hit songs from Lyman and the Teenagers quickly followed.
I don't know what I can say about this next act. What can you say but sensational? All over the world. Frankie Lyman, a 13-year-old youngster with a great way with the song, and the Teenagers. Baby, baby.
Baby, baby, how I want you. Baby, baby, how I need you. Baby, baby, you're the only one. 2, 3, 4.
Although they were only together for 18 months, Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers exerted an enormous influence. Besides spawning several kid vocal groups, Lyman's original vocal style and interplay helped to model such artists as Smokey Robinson, Michael Jackson with the Jackson 5, and even Diana Ross and the Supremes.
Baby, baby, want to bring you. Baby, baby, a wedding ring too. Baby, baby, soon we'll be 3, 4, 5, 6.
By 1957, the rock and roll frenzy had brought an onslaught of hits and new performers. The Everly Brothers took the rock and roll model and brought their own unique harmonies and country guitar sounds to the mix. Their first hit single, Bye Bye Love, had a Bo Diddley beat that helped lift the song to number 2 on the charts. That began a 3-year string of classic hit singles, including Wake Up Little Susie and All I Have to Do Is Dream. Also in 1957, Buddy Holly and the Crickets appeared on the scene with That'll Be the Day, a dynamic single with a fresh sound. It shot straight to number 1 on the charts. Charles Hardin Holly was born in Lubbock, Texas in 1936. As a child, he learned to play the violin and the piano, but soon discovered a preference for the guitar. With his unique vocal talent and guitar skill, Holly formed the band The Crickets in 1956. Once they found monstrous success with That'll Be the Day, the band quickly continued their musical blitz with Oh Boy, Maybe Baby, and Peggy Sue.
She's the one that deals the more, well, bebop-a-doo. She's my baby.
Gene Vincent had only one really big hit, Bebop-a-Lula, which epitomized the rockabilly sound. Yet his place as one of the great early rock and roll singers is backed by a wealth of recordings that rate among the best rockabilly of all time.
Bebop-a-doo. She's my baby.
After the enormous success of Blackboard Jungle, as well as the quickly churned out follow-up Rock Around the Clock, the box office was nearly dominated by rock and roll movies.
There was one group of people, one demographic that was still staying true to Hollywood, and that was teenagers, because they just wanted to get out of the house. Their parents were in the TV room, but they wanted to be out somewhere. They wanted to be at the drive-in theater.
For the first time, teenagers were a separate commercial unit away from their parents, and the market was quick to catch on.
I could just sit and listen to him forever. He's wonderful, and I've bought every one of his records. It makes me flip. I buy all of his records.
Elvis Presley's aspirations were too big to be limited to records and live appearances. And by late 1956, his first Hollywood movie, Love Me Tender, had been released.
Introducing Elvis Presley as Clint Reno.
who loved his brother, but also loved his brother's girl.
The Alan Freed rock films were important because a lot of people around the country didn't have access to visual rock and roll. The only rock you really saw on TV was the Ed Sullivan Show, and then also Ricky Nelson on the Ozzie and Harriet Show. So what Freed did is he put together these atrocious basic plots and then segue a lot of great groups into these stories. And so for a lot of people, that was their only way to see a Frankie Lyman or a Chuck Berry or a Fats Domino.
They were fun movies. They were movies that were laughable and something to have fun with. Most youngsters of that day, they were not exposed to the kind of stuff they're exposed to today. So they're hipper, they can dance today, whereas during that, they were protected by their parents.
Where do you have to go?
To the movie.
Oh.
Just a minute, young lady.
So those little square movies, that was right down their alley.
In 1957, Dick Clark became a familiar face to television viewers across America with the national premiere of Philadelphia's local dance program, American Bandstand.
Of course, rock and roll had already been around for a while, but suddenly, now every day in the afternoon, 5 days a week, you suddenly had this rock and roll show. The country almost came to a stop. At least teenagers would run home from school, stores would turn on their TV sets. Everybody was watching American Bandstand.
The show had a tremendous immediate influence on record sales, and several of rock's originators were showcased on the program. However, the burgeoning years of American Bandstand were dominated by a more moderate sound in order to connect to a broader audience. Clark was instrumental in creating the success of many teen idols, such as Pat Boone, Bobby Rydell, Fabian, and Paul Anka.
The recording sensation of the nation, Paul, Lonely Boy Anka.
I'm just a lonely boy, lonely and blue.
By and large, Dick Clark had sort of, I think, a bad effect on rock and roll. He owned parts of record companies, pressing plants, management companies, publishing. I mean, he had his fingers in everything. He saw rock and roll as a way of selling music to young girls. And he knew that what the young girls really wanted was, you know, guys with curly hair and smooth, and sang to them.
Rock and roll came along, and it was like, wow, this is brilliant. It became watered down very quickly. Suddenly it became Popeyes. I don't know, it just went from being this real hard, edgy, fun thing into sort of, you know, something far less exciting.
Oh, rockabilly, 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 rock, rockabilly, rockabilly, rock, 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 rockabilly, 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 rock, rockabilly, rockabilly, rock, rock. People.
Guy Mitchell's Rockabilly may have been the first song to give a name to the unique combination of rock and country hillbilly music, but it also reflected a tamer, softer edge sound, demonstrating the homogenized attitude that rock and roll was quickly developing. Mitchell was a sign of things to come in the late 50s. Teen idols crafted by the industry.
You know, whenever a bright young new star comes to the studio, all of us are very proud and very happy to welcome the newcomer and to extend a helping hand. That's why I'd like you to meet a young man who's just about taken the entertainment world by storm. The one and only Fabian.
Oh, hi there. You know, so many wonderful things have happened to me in a short space of time, thanks to you.
Started in Philadelphia when I was 14 years old. I was making $6 a week working in a drugstore after school. One afternoon, a stranger came up to me and said, "How'd you like to be a recording star?"
Shake it up, baby.
Fabian was perhaps the most successful of the clean-cut young singing stars packaged to appeal to young girls. These teen idols seemed safer and less threatening than the boisterous direction that rock was becoming known for. After all, how bad could rock and roll be if it was featured on one of America's favorite family situation comedies every week?
I'm walking, yes indeed, I'm talking for you and me, and I'm hoping that you come back to me.
Ricky Nelson fit the teen idol image, but ultimately, he could deliver the goods. He was one of the biggest of the 50s teen idols, so it took a while for him to attain the same level of critical respect as many other early rock greats.
Pretty baby, I even I'm walking, yes indeed, I'm talking for you and me, and I'm hoping that you come back to me.
Nelson grew into a teenager as a regular on his parents' hit television show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet.
Would you like to see me tap dance?
Just don't pay any attention to him.
I think he's cute.
He's not.
I am too. Will you tap dance, Ricky? Sure, I can sing too.
What you gonna do when the well runs dry? You're gonna run away and hide. I'm gonna run right by your side. For you, pretty baby, I'd even die on walking.
By 1956, Ricky Nelson was just the right age to become a vital part of the rock and roll craze. His first single, a cover of Fats Domino's I'm Walkin', was released in 1957. It was helped immensely, as would all of his early songs, by his performances on the television show. Nelson played an important role in rock and roll's absorption into mainstream America. Aside from Elvis, he would become the highest-selling singer in the U.S. into the early 1960s.
What you gonna do when the well runs dry? You're gonna
The market wanted to corral rock and roll. It wanted to bring it back into something that was a little more manageable. And the girls, who were the main market for pop, wanted a love interest. They didn't want some wild guy up there with his hair flying all over the place.
In only a few short years, rock and roll had undergone an evolution of change. And by the end of the 1950s, a variety of events signaled the demise of the glory days of rebellious rock and roll.
Elvis Presley no longer has that rock and roll beat. The tempo is hut 2, 3, 4 for Private Presley. He's at Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, beginning his 2-year Army hitch courtesy of the Memphis Draft Board. Involuntarily retired, the gyrating guitarist's departure from the public eye left his blue jean fans all shook up, so we hear. But Elvis doesn't seem to mind at all.
While he's in the military, a lot of things are happening back home. The rock and roll world changes completely. To rock historians, you know, they'll point out eternally, it's not shaking up for the better. Jerry Lee Lewis gets himself in trouble by marrying his teenage cousin. It's a career killer. Chuck Berry gets himself in trouble and winds up doing some time behind bars. Little Richard leaves the scene. He goes off to become a minister. There was an incredible rockabilly period, and it seems to have died out. And the music scene shifts over. And with these guys out of the way, record promoters have to have somebody to sing the songs. And so they choose a different kind of singer while Elvis is away. It's the birth of the so-called teen idols.
Disrupting to the music that many felt was corrupting America's youth, in 1958, the U.S. government began an investigation into the common practice of DJs accepting money to play certain records. Payola.
Well, what about the payola charges?
What payola charges?
Well, that are rife in the industry right now. Have you ever taken payola?
No, I have not.
It was a matter of your personal integrity, I think you said?
Correct.
Do you really think there's room for personal integrity in the rock and roll business the way it's going?
Why not?
But the biggest blow to the spirited dawn of rock and roll happened one snowy evening in an Iowa cornfield. A small plane crash snuffed out 3 kindred souls, shining lights in the creation of the cultural phenomenon of rock and roll. At just 17 years old, Richie Valenzuela was transformed into the sensational rock and roll star, Richie Valens. Within 8 months in 1958, this amazingly talented singer and guitarist launched 3 chart-busting hits, including his rocking version of an old traditional Mexican folk song, La Bamba.
He was kind, he was gentle, he was keen-eyed, he had a wonderful voice, a voice that could take him from the lowest registers to the highest registers. He was able to communicate a certain kind of cry. The pity of it all
I think Richie came to really symbolize and even embody the sort of spirit there was in 1958. It was the birth of rock and roll. It was very young, it was very optimistic, very hopeful, and Richie was all of these things himself.
On February 2nd, 1959, Richie Valens, Buddy Holly, and J.P. Richardson, who was known as the Big Bopper, had performed a show at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa. It was freezing cold outside and the tour bus had developed heating problems, so arrangements were made for Holly and his remaining backup musicians, Waylon Jennings and Tommy Alsop, to fly on to the tour's next gig. But Jennings gave his seat up to the Big Bopper. Then Tommy Alsop told Richie Valens, "I'll flip you for the remaining seat." On the toss of a coin, Valens won the seat, and Alsop the rest of his life.
The day the music died, Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, Richie Valens went down in that airplane and closed the first chapter.
The end of the 50s marked the end of an extraordinary era in music. The spark of rock and roll had been ignited throughout the world. Although by decade's end, there was a lull in the storm. The sound of the music and the attitude of the genre would soon drastically change. In the early 1960s, British bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones picked up on what the pioneers had created and threw it back at us in a new, freshly invigorated form.
Elvis, Little Richard, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, and Richie Valens, the Big Bopper, all those pioneers of the 50s took their music and transcended their lives and achieved a status that created a new art form for us.
Why do we still love rock and roll from the 1950s? It's a bright, spontaneous music that was made to be danced to. It was happy music.
Oh, dearly caught a nanny goat to make a pretty baby a Sunday coat. Oh, dearly caught a bell cat to make a pretty baby a Sunday hat. Motor come to my house with black cat bones.